Uh, okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Majnana Timirandasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurumiltamena Tasmai Sri Guru Namaha, Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Yudapada Kamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavansha, Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Tamsa Jivam, Sadvaitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sakara Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha, He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati, Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste. Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. So today's title is on the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. This is also actually a continuation from the intro section. 2 weeks back, we saw our session was on the spirit of Bhagavad Gita. So that was the first section in the introductory chapter in Bhagavad Gita as it is. So today we'll look at this section on the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. Just what is the Bhagavad Gita? The purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. So we'll look at the meaning of this in detail after this. The meaning of the nescience of material existence. Arjuna surrendered unto Sri Krishna since he was in difficulty. So Arjuna was supposed to fight against his relatives, but he was reluctant to do so, as we have seen from the first chapter. And therefore, he was in great difficulty. It was his duty to fight, but he was unable to do so because he was in he was identifying everything from in terms of the material designations. Similarly, the conditioned souls, we also have the same problems faced by Arjuna, mainly due to identifying ourselves too much in terms of material designations. Arjuna surrendered to Sri Krishna, and consequently, this Bhagavad Gita was spoken. Not only Arjuna, but every one of us is full of anxieties because of this material existence. Since we exist in this material world, we can never escape from its influence. So by default, as conditioned souls, we are always under the influence of the material energy, and that is the root cause for all our problems. We are forced to undergo the miseries of not only the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, but also as long as we are in this material world, we also have to go through the threefold miseries: Adhyatmik, Adi Daivik, Adi Bhautik. So we can clearly see all these problems and miseries happening all around us. We are aware of it, but very few of us actually engage in spiritual inquiry to inquire into why this is happening. And even after knowing Because once we engage in spiritual inquiry and we come into the association of devotees, so somehow we can get the answers from the Shastras. But even for have those who have uh, studied the Shastras, still they may not necessarily act according to the scriptural injunctions. So merely knowing the Shastras uh, from an academic point of view will not be enough. We have to act upon it. We have to follow the instructions, especially like in Bhagavad Gita, it is full of instructions by the Supreme Lord. He tells us clearly what he is expecting from us, and he tells us how we can do what he wants. So as long as we follow his instructions, we can liberate ourselves from this misery of material existence. However, not many people, though they may have some knowledge about the Gita, still they are not inclined to act according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord. Like even in the case of Arjuna, he in the beginning, in chapter 1, he was not willing to fight. But after uh, hearing the instructions uh, of the Supreme Lord, but it was not like a monologue of Lord Krishna. Uh, Arjuna was also submissively inquiring about a lot of topics, and the Supreme Lord was also uh, answering him with a lot of in-depth explanation. So he was unwilling to fight, and he put away his weapons in the end of the first chapter. But uh, towards the end of the last chapter, he becomes convinced of everything that was spoken by the Supreme Lord, and he says, Karishye Vashanam Tava, I'm prepared to act according to your instructions. He did not even say that, okay, I'll annihilate the enemies. So initially he was too attached to all the material designations. He was only viewing everything from his own point of view. But after understanding the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, he clearly understood that the ultimate perfection of human life is to act according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord, to act as servants of the Supreme Lord. So as long as we do not understand that, as long as we do not act in that direction, we are always going to be entangled in this material existence. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. Actually, we are not meant to be threatened by non-existence. Our existence is eternal because we are eternal, fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and therefore we have qualitative similarity with the Supreme Lord, who is Sachidananda Vigraha. He is uh, he is the eternal being, full of bliss, full of knowledge. So similarly, we have qualitative similarity with him. So we are also meant to be eternal beings, but somehow or other we are put into asat. Asat refers to that which does not exist, or the opposite of sat. So this material existence completely um, it completely degrades us to the position in which we are not actually meant to be. Uh, so we'll first start by looking at the Chatusloki Gita. In 10.8, Lord Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabho matta sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddhabhava samanita. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So here, the Lord says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service. We often hear from many self-proclaimed intellectuals who also call themselves atheists or rationalists, they often say that there is no spiritual world. Everything emanates from nature. So, according to them, everything emanates from nature, and there is no spiritual world. So, somehow they say this to deny the existence of God. So, here the Supreme Lord clearly says, the wise who perfectly know this, the wise who perfectly know that Krishna is the source of all spiritual and material worlds. The wise ones who know it, they will be engaged in devotional service. So indirectly, it is implied about those who do not know or those who do not accept the existence of the spiritual world. So indirectly, it has been implied about those who deny the existence of the spiritual world, and also those who deny the existence of God. But whether they like it or not, um, being conditioned souls, we all will be reminded about the existence of God, especially when he appears in the form of time, because time is also a very important factor which actually differentiates, it distinguishes the spiritual world from the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no influence of time. In the material world, everything is under the influence of time. And we also know from chapter 11, especially, like we just saw the verse yesterday in uh, in verse 11.32, Kalosmi Loka Shayakrit Pravruto. Lord Krishna says, time I am. So this material world will always be under the influence of time, and it is also one of the 5 subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara Jiva Prakriti Kala Karma. So even for those who deny the existence of God, still God appears in the form of time. So no one can deny the existence of time. No one can say that they are not subject to the influence of time. So even for those who want to deny the existence of God, they can never deny the existence of time. And Lord Krishna clearly says in the Gita, not just in chapter 11, also in chapter 10, in some of the verses, Lord Krishna says that time is the greatest subduer, and I am time personified. So in order to overcome our material miseries, first we have to understand that everything emanates from the Supreme Lord, and we also have to know our current position. We are trapped in this material world, and the spiritual world is the place where we are meant to be. So we have to uh, make it our firm resolve should be to completely liberate ourselves from this material world if we want to be liberated from the material miseries. Otherwise, those who want to continue denying the existence of God, those who always want to attribute everything to material nature, so they are free to be stuck here in this Dukalayam, and they are free to enjoy, though they themselves know that they are suffering. But uh, sometimes they only tend to use God as an excuse to put the blame on God. Otherwise, they'll be just enjoying like cats and dogs. They are never engaged in devotional service, but only when they are facing distress, only then they find an excuse. They find someone to blame. Then they blame God. Okay, if God really exists, why is this happening? Why is that happening? Well, Lord Krishna has put it very in a very plain and simple manner that this material world is Dukalayam. So there's simply no point in studying about why is this happening, why is that happening. We know that we are suffering. So to put an end to our suffering, we simply have to follow his instructions. So he has made it clear that this material world is Dukalayam. So this is how it is meant to be. Whether we want to remain here and continue suffering, or whether we want to liberate ourselves by following his instructions, is completely up to us. So even if we are going to remain adamant, if we are going to think that only we know everything, then just to use the label of being an intellectual or rationalist or atheist. So if we simply want to deny everything that was spoken by the Supreme Lord, so the Supreme Lord is not going to suffer because of that. Only we are going to suffer. So he has delivered the transcendental teachings of the Gita for our benefit. So it is entirely up to us whether we want to liberate ourselves from this material world or not. 10.9 Machitta Madhyata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Cha Ramanti Cha. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So we can clearly see from 10.8 and also in 10.9. Again, just like in many of the verses from the Gita, there is a clear emphasis on devotees. So the Supreme Lord himself, he favors the devotees the most, not the karmis, not the jnanis. He favors the devotees the most, and the teachings of the Gita are also meant for the devotees, even if people may be actually there are, as we know, there are three main divisions of the Gita. The first 6 chapters are about Karma Yoga, the middle 6 are about Bhakti Yoga, and the last 6 are about Jnana Yoga. Still, a lot of people tend to summarize all the teaching of the Gita based on what was spoken in only from the Karma Yoga section or from the Jnana Yoga section. They rarely talk about what was spoken in the Bhakti Yoga section. However, based on the emphasis given by Lord, the Supreme Lord himself, in many of the verses, he keeps emphasizing on the distinct qualities of being a devotee, how the devotees will ultimately benefit the most by being engaged in devotional service. And regarding the discourses between devotees, since we are all conditioned souls, of course, all the living entities in this material world are conditioned souls, but only we, the human beings, we have the ability to be engaged in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. What begins as spiritual inquiry should culminate into devotional service. It should translate into action. It is not sufficient if we simply question about why am I suffering. Okay, so we are born, we live for some time, then we die, then this place is full of suffering. So that is okay, but we have to focus on what we can do to put an end to our suffering, and it should translate into real action, and that happens only when we are engaged in devotional service. So when we converse about the Supreme Lord, when we speak Krishna Katha to the other devotees, so it is also stated in the Bhagavatam, verses from chapter 2 of the first canto, if I'm not mistaken, verses 17 and 18 especially. नष्टप्राय अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवती नैष्टिकी श्रृणुतां स्वागत कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवण कीर्तना हृदयंतस्तो हि अभद्राणि विदुनोति श्रूयत्सताम्. So since we are trapped in this material conditioning, the contamination can be cleansed only by the Supreme Lord, and that cleansing process happens when we begin to be engaged in devotional service, whether it can start with chanting, and slowly we can also regularly attend classes on the Gita and Bhagavatam. So uh, this is this is also very important to be understood clearly, because a lot of people are thinking that when we when we talk about chanting to certain people, they say that no, actually, I'm eating non-veg. I cannot really control my mind. I need to sit in some quiet place. Then only I can start chanting. If they are going to wait for all these ideal conditions, so um, it is no different from what they call utopia. So it is never going to happen, especially in this Kali Yuga. Um, we have to start somewhere, and the cleansing process starts only when we are engaged in action, only when we are engaged in devotional service. Only then the cleansing process happens. We cannot really wait for everything to be perfect and then start chanting like for one round. So it's never going to happen. So we have to start somewhere, and the cleansing happens gradually as we progress. तेषां सर्वयुक्तानां भजतां प्रीतिपूर्वकं तदामि बुद्धियोगं तं येन माम् उपयान्ति ते. So as long as we are prepared to endeavor, then we will receive help from the Supreme Lord. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So we should not simply give excuses to further delay uh, the initiation of our devotional service. So we have to start somewhere, and gradually, as we keep endeavoring sincerely, the Lord Himself will help us. So that's what He is saying in this verse. As long as we are constantly devoted to serving Him with love, as long as we sincerely endeavor, so He will give the understanding by which we can attain perfection. 10.11 Tesham evanukam partam aham ajnanayam tamah nashami atma bhavastha jnana deepena bhasvata. To show them special mercy, I, dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So this material world is full of darkness, because even from the uh, when it is compared to the spiritual world, it is fully illuminated by the Brahmajyoti effulgence. But this material world itself is defined as the dark cloud, which is devoid of the Brahmajyoti effulgence. And therefore, since this place is devoid of the effulgence, it is in darkness, and darkness also means ignorance. So as long as we are willing to sincerely endeavor and progress in our devotional service, the Supreme Lord will continue to assist us, because He is always present in our hearts as Paramatma, and He knows our progress. He knows whether we are sincere or not. So we just have to start somewhere without giving excuses, because it's either now or never. Time is always running out. So even like we have seen in our previous sessions, there's the explanation from Canto 7 of Bhagavatam regarding how even for someone who might be able to live up to 100 years, even for that person, he hardly has 30 years of time to be engaged in devotional service. And it is also stated in the Bhagavatam 12th canto that as Kali Yuga advances, people may not even be able to cross the age of 50. But we are still not there in a very advanced stage of Kali Yuga, yet still we have already started to see those symptoms. People are struggling to cross even the age of 50. So we just can't afford to be complacent, and we can't afford to waste this wonderful opportunity. So what is this nescience of material existence? It is all due to darkness of ignorance. So as we can see from the front cover illustration of Bhagavatam, first canto, so the spiritual world is fully illuminated by the Brahmajyoti effulgence which emanates from the body of the Supreme Lord. So not just the Goloka region, even the Vaikuntha regions are all illuminated by the effulgence, but this dark cloud, where which is actually called the Mahatattva, and all the innumerable material universes are also within this dark cloud. So this place of darkness is the reason for our ignorance. We are not able to see the light, or we are not even able to see the place of our origin because we are fallen into this material world, and since we are trapped in this place of darkness, we are not able to realize our the place where we originally came from. And due to that darkness of ignorance, we are all we are entangled in this material existence, and we continue to suffer the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. And it it applies to all the living entities in all the three divisions, upper, middle, lower, and the 14 planetary systems. Even Lord Brahma himself is not exempt from this suffering. So that's why it is very serious that we it is not sufficient if we merely know the theoretical aspects of it. We have to act according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord to liberate ourselves from this place of darkness. So for those who completely deny the existence of the spiritual world, well, if they love this material world so much, if they attribute everything to material nature, then they are free to um, continue transmigrating in all the 84 lakh species of material bodies, and they can continue suffering the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. And then whenever they feel that it is convenient to blame God, then they can blame God for everything. But that is not going to affect the Supreme Lord in any way. Only such deluded souls, only they are going to suffer. So even in the invocation prayers, it means I was born in the darkest ignorance. So by default, we, the conditioned souls, we are in ignorance since we are trapped in this place of darkness in the material world. So in order to liberate ourselves from this place of darkness, first we need to liberate ourselves from ignorance, and that is why we need the mercy of the spiritual master. But the Supreme Lord himself resides in our heart as the Chaita Guru, as the supreme spiritual master. But of course, we also have our Diksha Guru and Siksha Guru who continue to enrich our knowledge and inspire us so that we can continue to progress in our spiritual journey. So as mentioned earlier in Gita 8.15, the Supreme Lord has made it very clear that this place is Dukkalayam. So if we follow his instructions, because this is exactly what he wants from us, he has made it very clear that this material world is Dukkalayam. So there's just no point in trying to clean up this place. So a lot of people, they talk about making the world a better place to live in, but we can clearly see that things are only getting from bad to worse. So that is how it is meant to be. As Kali Yuga advances, it will keep getting worse. We can never make it better. So it is best if we focus on uh, making ourselves better first. So first we have to inquire into why we are suffering and how we can liberate ourselves from all these sufferings. So it is not possible to make this world a better place and enjoy here. This place will continue to be Dukalayam. So the only way to solve our problems is by following the instructions of the Supreme Lord. Now, regarding why the Gita was spoken, so Arjuna was trapped in the nescience of material existence. He was viewing everything in terms of the material designations. So one of the reasons here in 1.30, Arjuna says, I'm now unable to stand here any longer. I'm forgetting myself and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune, O Krishna, killer of the Keshi demon. So he was feeling uh, he was feeling compassion for his relatives. He did not want to kill them. So this was one of the reasons. Then he also says, O maintainer of all living entities, I am not prepared to fight with them, even in exchange for the three worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? So he was also asking, what can I gain after killing all my relatives? What am I going to enjoy when all my relatives are no longer there? So this was another reason. Then he also said, sin will overcome us if we slay such aggressors. Therefore, it is not proper for us to kill the sons of Dhritarashtra and our friends. What should we gain, O Krishna, husband of the goddess of fortune? And how could we be happy by killing our own kinsmen? Again, we can clearly see that in all these verses, Arjuna is viewing everything from the material uh, perspective. He's looking at everything in terms of the material designations. My relatives, I can't kill them because he was thinking that by slaying their body that they are going to be killed. Of course, that was clearly explained by the Supreme Lord in chapter 2 onwards. But from all these verses which Arjuna spoke, we can see that he was viewing everything in terms of the material designations. So that is the effect of being trapped in material nescience. With the destruction of the dynasty, the eternal family tradition is vanquished, and thus the rest of the family becomes involved in irreligion. Again, he's worried about the destruction of family traditions. So again, he's talking about the family relations, again, the material aspects of it. So he was completely deluded, and um, his his suffering went to such a point where he cast aside his bow and arrows and sat down on the chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. So this was due to his ignorance of viewing everything from the material perspective. He was viewing everything in terms of material designations. But we as spirit souls, we cannot the more we indulge in the material designations, so the more we are going to degrade ourselves. Self here means our soul. So our soul is our true identity. The material body and all the bodily relationships that accompany it are not meant to be our original identity. So as long as we are trapped in this ignorance, it will only be a constant source of distress. So this is what the Supreme Lord makes us understand through the Gita. And the actual teachings of the Gita were actually spoken by the Supreme Lord only after Arjuna surrendered as a disciple. Now I'm confused about my duty and I've lost all composure because of my weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I'm your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So Arjuna surrendered to the Supreme Lord as a disciple. And from this point onwards, the actual exchange starts. The Supreme Lord starts to deliver the transcendental teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And another reason why the Supreme Lord uh, specifically chose Arjuna to deliver the teachings of the Gita is also explained in chapter 4. In 4.1, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, Vivaswan, and Vivaswan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind. And Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. So the teachings of the Gita were conveyed millions of years back, and uh, it it is still applicable, and it will continue to be applicable to all the conditioned souls, because we have been suffering since time immemorial, and as long as we do not endeavor to put an end to our suffering, we will still continue to suffer by transmigrating from one material body to another. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So again, it is stated here, Sa Kalneya Mata Yogo Nashta Parantapa. Though the teachings of the Gita are transcendental, but even the chain of disciplic succession was lost, it was broken in due course of time. So again, we are seeing the effect of time, the influence of time. Time subdues everything and it somehow destroys everything. But some self-proclaimed intellectuals might even say that, okay, if the teachings of the Gita are transcendental, then why did it get destroyed? Actually, the teachings were not lost. The Supreme Lord is always there to restore it. It was only that the chain of disciplic succession was broken in due course of time. So since we are all in this material world is always under the influence of time, and everything will be subdued by time, as the Lord himself explains in chapter 10. So only the exchange, the uh, the manner in which the knowledge was being passed on, that was lost. However, the Supreme Lord, being the father of Dharma, he will always restore it. So the transcendental teachings can never be destroyed. It is just that everything that happens in this material world, it always gets subdued by time. And in 4.3, the specific reason why Arjuna was chosen to be the disciple to receive the transcendental teachings of the Gita is explained. Bhakto Sime Sakacheti. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you, because you are my devotee as well as my friend, and can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. So even from this verse itself, chapter 4, it is still in a very early stage of the discourse. So even from this point itself, the Supreme Lord is making it clear that the transcendental teachings of the Gita are meant for devotees who have faith in the Supreme Lord, who are not envious of the Supreme Lord. So only then we can understand the teachings of the Gita. Otherwise, we will only be speculating and distorting the actual meaning of the Gita. Though we may have earned a lot of academic degrees, so without faith in the Supreme Lord, we will continue to mislead not just ourselves but also others. So we have even seen many so-called famous personalities who wrote so much garbage in the name of commentary regarding the Gita, where they completely distorted everything that was spoken by the Supreme Lord. In 15.7, the Supreme Lord says, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So as we saw earlier in 8.15, the Supreme Lord clearly says that this material world is Dukkalayam, and he also um, says that the living entities are struggling very hard with the senses. So it is not just for the human beings, all the living entities in all the 84 lakh material bodies, they are all suffering, though we are all originally the eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord. So being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we are not meant to suffer in this material world. This place is not where we actually belong, but due to our material contamination and our foolishness, we have ended up here. We originally belong to the superior energy of the Supreme Lord. So uh, the three categories of energies of the Supreme Lord are also explained in chapter 7. In 7.4, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, all together these eight constitute my separated material energies. Besides these, there is another superior energy of mind which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So the Supreme Lord's superior internal energy is where we have actually originated from. But since due to our conditioning by this material energy and the material modes of nature, we are now trapped in between the superior internal energy and the inferior material energy. The superior internal energy is called Antaranga Shakti. The material inferior energy is called Bahiranga Shakti, and the marginal energy is called Tatastha Shakti, referring to the conditioned souls. So we are trapped in the middle. We are neither here nor there. We though our original identity is that we belong to the Antaranga Shakti, due to our material contamination, we have been dragged from the um, topmost position, and the Mahamaya, the Bahiranga Shakti, is actually dragging us downwards. So still, due to our original constitutional position, since the spirit soul is eternal, so we are like trapped in between. We can we can never uh, we can never be completely degraded to the level of the inferior energy. At the same time, due to our contamination, we have degraded from the original position. So we are now trapped in the middle. So that's why the conditioned souls are known as Tatastha Shakti, or the marginal energy. This marginal energy comprises of the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So the conditioned souls are meant to, we ended up here due to our desires to enjoy. We wanted to be enjoyers and controllers. However, it is only due to our bewilderment. As stated in 3.27, the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Though we may think that we are enjoying, we are controlling everything, just like the self-proclaimed intellectuals who go to the extent of denying the existence of God. So it is only due to the bewilderment by the three modes of material nature. They themselves, those so-called rationalists and atheists, when they deny the existence of God, they attribute everything to nature, material nature. So that itself shows just how bewildered they are by the three modes of material nature. So, regardless of the fact that we may think that we are actually enjoying in this material world, it is only the three puppeteers, the three modes of material nature, they keep dominating us. We are only dancing to their tunes. And because of that, we are suffering. All created beings have their source in these two natures of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world. Know for certain that I am both the origin and dissolution. So we either belong to the actually we originally we belong to the superior energy, but due to our contamination, we have fallen to this material world. So we can either be we can either continue to suffer in this material world, or we can liberate ourselves and go back to the spiritual world. So in either case, we will continue to be servants. In the spiritual world, we can be servants of the Supreme Lord directly in direct association with Him. Otherwise, even in the material world, we are indirectly being the servants of the Supreme Lord, because the inferior material energy is also part and parcel of His energy. So when we are being dominated by Maya, particularly Maya in the material world, so still we are indirectly being servants of the Supreme Lord, but for no reason. Uh, if we if we accept, if we get rid of all our material contamination and regain the association of the Supreme Lord as His eternal servants, then we can enjoy transcendental bliss in the spiritual world. But due to our material contamination, we are trapped here. We are actually thinking that we are enjoying, but we are not. We are only suffering. And still, we are being servants of the Supreme Lord, though we are actually being dominated by the material energy. Still, indirectly, we are still being servants of the Supreme Lord. So, in either case, we will have to be servants. It is only due to our delusion that we are thinking that we are enjoying in this world. There are also similar verses spoken by Lord Krishna in chapter 15, where he makes it clear about how the uh, spiritual and material worlds are different. In 15.6, the Lord says there are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every living entity is infallible. So we, the conditioned souls who are suffering in this material world, we are the fallible entities, and the liberated souls who have regained the association of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, they are infallible. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. Because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and the Vedas as that Supreme Person. So these verses are from chapter 15, titled Purushottama Yoga, and it is in this verse that the Supreme Lord clearly establishes His position as Purushottama. So the Supreme Person, the Purushottama, is the one who is beyond both the fallible and infallible living beings. So it is only due to bewilderment by Maya that the Mayavadi school of thought, they propagate the ideas that about merging with the Supreme. So there is no spiritual progress in the Mayavadi school of thought, because they propagate the idea of merging with the Supreme Lord, becoming one with Him. But from these verses, we can clearly see how the Supreme Lord demolishes those thoughts based on uh, monism, about oneness, about merging with the Supreme. In 15.7 itself, he has made it clear that we are eternal fragmental parts. Eternal fragmental parts means that there was never a time when we were merged with him, and we are not going to merge with him in the future. We are always going to remain as individuals, but in our original constitutional position as servants of the Supreme Lord. And there are also several verses um, from chapter 2 of the Gita, which talks about how the soul cannot be cut into pieces or broken. So, if that is the case, uh, we cannot really talk about being one with the Lord, then separating from Him, then becoming one with Him again. So, even from these three verses, 15.16 to 15.18, the Lord has made it very clear that He is even beyond the liberated souls. The liberated souls in the spiritual world, they are the infallible living beings, and the Supreme Lord is actually even beyond them. So, it is very clear that uh, this uh, this idea of oneness, merging with the Supreme, and all that are clearly rejected by the Lord Himself. So, in this Mayavadi school of thought, which talks about merging with the Supreme, there is no spiritual progress in any way, because initially we are full of material contamination. We come to this material world to become enjoyers and controllers. And then when we talk about merging with the Supreme or becoming one with Him, so still the material contamination is still there, because uh, we are still being deluded by our ego to think that we can somehow occupy that throne, because we are the Mayavadi school of thought actually talks about somehow becoming one with God, uh, where you can actually like even some people, they say that everyone is God, everything is God. So even when you talk about becoming one with God or merging with the Supreme, so somehow we are not regaining our original constitutional position as servants. We are somehow still there is the obsession to somehow occupy that throne. So still, uh, if that obsession remains, then where is the spiritual progress? There's no cleansing of any material contamination. So in these verses, the Supreme Lord clearly demolishes the idea of becoming one with the Supreme or merging with the Supreme. Even for the even when we get liberated and enter into a spiritual world, the Supreme Lord will still be transcendental. He will still be beyond even the infallible beings. So that is also the crux of Katha Upanishad in the conversation between Nachiketa and Yamraj. So the main question was regarding what happens to the liberated souls, what happens to those after death, what happens to the souls which attain liberation. So do they become independent, or does the Lord still maintain them? So the verdict of Katha Upanishad is that the Lord continues to uh, maintain and guide even the infallible living entities or the liberated souls. So no matter what happens, the Lord remains transcendental. He remains beyond even the liberated souls. So it is completely ridiculous to talk about merging with the Supreme or becoming one with Him after death. Out of so many human beings who are suffering, there are a few who are actually inquiring about their position. Unless one is awakened to this position of questioning his suffering, unless he realizes that he does not want suffering, but rather wants a solution, then one is not to be considered a perfect human being. Humanity begins when this sort of inquiry is awakened in one's mind. So, spiritual inquiry is a, a distinct feature of the human beings. Only we are blessed with this ability. Though even the animals and plants, though they are also spirit souls embodied in different material bodies, still they do not have this ability to be engaged in spiritual inquiry. So we have attained this rare opportunity. So, um, of course, the ability to inquire is always there, but what matters the most is what we actually do with the knowledge that we gain. It should culminate in devotional service ultimately. Otherwise, it's any so-called spiritual inquiry which does not culminate into devotional service is completely useless, because we are never going to solve our problems without being engaged in devotional service ultimately. So out of the 84 lakh species of material bodies, 4 lakh, there are 4 lakh human species. So 4 out of 84. So even from this composition, we can see that it it is a very limited quota. So it is a very rare opportunity to get this human form of life. And if we are going to waste this precious human form of life by competing with the animals, by only focusing on the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, then we really do not deserve to get a second chance. Because if we are going to simply waste this uh, this opportunity, then where is the guarantee that someone is going to focus on devotional service when he gets another human form of life? So at least other living entities who are somehow, even some of the animals, they might have progressed to a certain extent. So they actually deserve the apartment of this human form of life, not for the humans who have attained the human form of life but continue to live like animals. In the Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra, this inquiry is called Brahma Jignasa, Atato Brahma Jignasa. So in the Vedanta Sutra, the first sutra itself starts with Atato Brahma Jignasa. So Brahma Jignasa is about inquiring about the nature of the absolute. Those who begin to question why they are suffering, or why or where they came from, and where they shall go after death, are proper students for understanding Bhagavad Gita. The sincere student should also have a firm respect for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such a student was Arjuna. So even there is a particular setting under which this spiritual inquiry uh, will occur. Spiritual inquiry rarely happens when everything is okay. We rarely uh, get to be engaged in spiritual inquiry whenever we are happy, whenever we are celebrating. Um, it only happens when the conditioned soul is under distress, because only then we actually start to think, why am I suffering? Why am I being under such distress? So that even in the case of Arjuna, he started to inquire so much from the Supreme Lord only when he was put into such distress uh, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So this Brahma Jignasa moment rarely happens whenever we are happy, and therefore the distress that we experience is also required. Otherwise, we will never get the chance to be engaged in spiritual inquiry. So, uh, whatever distress that we experience in life is actually an opportunity for those who haven't actually started to inquire. It is an opportunity given by the Supreme Lord for them to actually start inquiring. Otherwise, there's simply no chance for anyone who is happy to be engaged in Brahma Jignasa. So any person who has proper knowledge, uh, any person who does not um, have knowledge according to these aspects stated in chapter 13 from verse 8 to 12, if our so-called knowledge does not cover these aspects, so that cannot be called knowledge. So a truly knowledgeable person should be able to at least perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Also, there are other aspects mentioned like approaching a bona fide spiritual master, Acharyopasanam, accepting the importance of self-realization, philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge. So the Supreme Lord clearly describes about what is to be considered as true knowledge. We tend to think that simply by attending the so-called academic courses in the so-called academic institutions that we can become knowledgeable, but it just doesn't work that way. The so-called academic institutions can only teach us how we can become better than animals in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. We as spirit souls, we can only get the answers and the solutions to all our problems from spiritual knowledge. So these are the aspects which cover spiritual knowledge, and a person who truly has spiritual knowledge should be at least be able to perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So someone who is not able to even perceive the evil of the cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, so that person can never be considered as a knowledgeable person. At least by understanding that we are suffering, we are put into this incessant cycle, only then we can start to inquire about what is the root cause, and we can also work towards the solution. We don't have to invent the solution. The Supreme Lord has been merciful enough to give the solution in the Bhagavad Gita itself. So we simply have to follow his instructions. 2.17, that which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So here, that which pervades the entire body, it refers to consciousness. Consciousness is the symptom of the soul. So as long as there is consciousness in the body, uh, it it signifies that the soul is present in the body. The body, the material body, is just a place of residence for the spirit soul. That's why Srila Prabhupada uses the analogy of apartments to describe the 84 lakh species of material bodies. He often terms them as the 84 lakh apartments. All living entities who are spirit souls, they are given the opportunity to stay in these apartments according to their accumulated karma and continue to be engaged in uh, karma according to their tendencies. So since we have got this precious human body, it shows that we are somewhat close to the goal of attaining perfection. It's just that we should not waste this wonderful opportunity that we now have at present, because whatever we are doing now, we are actually preparing for our next body. So those who are hell-bent upon wasting this precious opportunity, so they will never get this uh, wonderful human form of life again, because there's no guarantee that they are going to put it to good use when they get another second chance. So it is our original identity is that we are spirit souls residing in the 84 lakh material bodies. The material body is just a place of residence for us to be engaged in karma. And since we have gotten this prestigious apartment, the human form of life, we have to utilize it for the purpose uh, which it is meant to be. And that is ultimately for devotional service. 2.20, for the soul, there's neither birth nor death. So if there's no birth nor death for the soul, then why is it that we are all celebrating our birthday? It is simply because the event called birth, it is actually the event during which the spirit soul enters into a particular material body, and the time during which it leaves a particular material body, that is called death, and then the cycle continues according to the accumulated karma. So it is clearly a degradation from the eternal characteristic of the spirit soul. The spirit soul, which is eternal, which has neither birth nor death, is forced into such a degraded condition where it is embodied in the uh, completely fragile and vulnerable material body, and we are forced to suffer this continuous cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Okay, so this verse was spoken simply to clear the doubts that Arjuna had about slaying his relatives. So, since our original identity is that we are all spirit souls, we can never be slain. However, it is also important to understand that since the spirit soul is originally has such exalted qualities, when it becomes embodied, it loses all its exaltedness and it becomes subservient to the material nature. 2.22, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So this cycle continues for the spirit soul as long as the spirit soul remains in the conditioned state. Condition means being conditioned by the three modes of material nature. In other words, as long as uh, we have accumulated material contamination, which forces us to be subject to or subservient to the three puppeteers, the three modes of material nature, we still remain in our degraded condition. Though we are originally spirit souls, we are still forced to be subservient to the material nature, which is actually inferior to us. The material energy is actually inferior to the superior energy. We all, we as spirit souls, we belong to the superior spiritual energy, but due to our embodied condition, we are being puppeted by the material energy. So what happens during the transmigration of the soul? The living entity in the material world carries its different conceptions of life from one body to another. As the air carries aromas, thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. And this is how the suffering continues in cycles in all the 84 lakh material bodies. So where do these different conceptions come from? It all depends on what we do during our life. So since we are now experiencing the human life, so it is best to utilize our human life according to the exact purpose for which it is meant to be. So our activities should all culminate in devotional service in order to liberate ourselves from this material entanglement. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So based on the activities that we perform, we are likely to get that type of body with a particular set of senses to enjoy in a particular way. So for those who proudly proclaim that they are pure non-vegetarian, so they'll be getting a particular body accompanied by a particular set of senses so that they can enjoy raw meat in their next birth. So that is clearly a degradation from this current human form of life. So our activities also determine our consciousness during even during the time of death. So as the Supreme Lord says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So as mentioned earlier, those who are not even able to perceive the evil of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, so they can never understand that we are actually suffering under this cycle, under this incessant cycle, mainly due to the spell of the modes of nature. Know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I'm in one sense everything, but I'm independent. I'm not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So this clearly, this verse clearly talks about how the material energy is subservient to the Supreme Lord. We being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we belong to the superior spiritual energy, but the material energy, which is actually subservient to the superior spiritual energy, is actually dominating us due to our present uh, state of being conditioned souls. So such is our degraded position now in this material world. Deluded by the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Mohitam na vijanati. So the self-proclaimed intellectuals who attribute everything to material nature and who deny the existence of God. So the Supreme Lord is talking about them, particularly here, due to the delusion by the three modes. So that is why the so-called intellectuals, they always tend to deny God, deny the existence of God. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly, but those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. So those intellectuals who may try to study the Shastras, still, since they have no faith in the Supreme Lord, they simply won't have the proper understanding. Though they may try, they can never clearly see what is happening. So, since we are suffering, how do we put an end to our suffering? 4.9 Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yoviti Tatvata Tyakva Deyam Punarjanma Neti Mameti So Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So we have to know the absolute truth. We have to know the Supreme Lord, and that is how we can liberate ourselves from this material world. And the Supreme Lord has made it very easy for us through the Bhagavad Gita itself. Lord Krishna specifically descends to re-establish the real purpose of life when man forgets that purpose. So we are trapped in this ocean of material existence due to our forgetfulness of our original constitutional position. But the Supreme Lord descends to the material world to reclaim the conditioned souls. One who actually enters the spirit of understanding his position, and for him, this Bhagavad Gita is spoken. Actually, we are all swallowed by the tigers of science, but the Lord is very merciful upon living entities, especially human beings. To this end, he spoke the Bhagavad Gita, making his friend Arjuna his student. So the Lord is always merciful enough to reclaim us from our current fallen position. But it is only we who are deluded by uh, the defiance of material existence. We refuse to follow his instructions. 4.7 Yada yada hi dharmasya glanirvavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyam. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. 4.8 Paritrana sadhanam vinashaya chadusriram dharma samsthapanataya tambami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So such is the mercy of the Supreme Lord. He himself is always anxious to have us back in the spiritual world, and therefore he personally descends to the material world. But we rarely understand how merciful he is. He descends to re-establish the Yuga Dharma. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu descended to re-establish the Yuga Dharma, and he gave us the simplest way to liberate ourselves. But still, not many of us have the taste for chanting the holy name, and we only tend to shift the blame on God whenever we see it as a convenient, whenever we see it as a matter of convenience, we simply shift the blame to God. Whenever we experience unpleasant things, being an associate of Lord Krishna, Arjuna was above all ignorance, but Arjuna was put into ignorance to question Lord Krishna about the problems of life. So the Brahma Jignasa moment never never experienced when someone is happy. So distress is required for us to at least start inquiring. But there's no need to go and search for answers everywhere. The answers are all there in Bhagavad Gita. And by the mercy of our acharyas, there is so much in-depth explanation, especially from Srila Prabhupada's purports. So whatever the Supreme Lord spoke for the benefit of future generation of human beings, these teachings are meant to help us attain perfection. As long as we do not engage in spiritual inquiry, and if our spiritual inquiry and the spiritual knowledge that we acquire does not culminate in devotional service, if we do not act uh, in devotional service, then we can never attain perfection. 8.7 Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mamanusman Yudhyacha Mai Arpita Mano Buddhir Mame Vaishasya Samshaya. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So, being engaged in spiritual inquiry or devotional service does not mean that we have to abandon all our material duties. So, interestingly, the Gita was spoken to Arjuna, who was a Kshatriya, and he himself was also a Grihastha. So, it is a myth that spiritual knowledge is meant for only the sannyasis, like what the Supreme Lord says in this verse. We simply have to remember him always, and we can even continue our material duties. As long as we continue our practice of devotional service, we will always be absorbed in his thoughts, and even our material duties can be spiritualized. Our swadharma, the prescribed duties, the prescribed material duties may require us to be engaged in even unknowingly, sometimes in sinful behavior. Like the Vaishyas, um, they may have to lie for the purpose of their business. The Kshatriyas have to kill. However, as long as we are engaged in devotional service, as long as we dedicate our actions to the Supreme Lord, we can cross over the ocean of miseries by being situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge. As long as we do not have the transcendental knowledge, we will always have the tendency to misunderstand about the sinful reactions, what is action, what is sinful action, like how Arjuna was deluded in the beginning in chapter 1. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. So, even though we may sometimes engage in sinful behavior while performing our material duties, for example, such temporary or accidental fall downs do not disrupt our devotional service as long as we are sincere and endeavoring with uh, sincerity and determination. So this is particularly important because there's no other way to escape from the influence of Maya, since Maya, the inferior material energy, is subservient to the Supreme Lord. So we have to surrender to the Supreme Lord. Only then we can cross over this ocean of material existence. So even in the concluding verses of the Gita, the Supreme Lord says that we just have to surrender unto him and act according to his instructions, and he will deliver us from all sinful reactions. Also from Bhagavatam 1-6, Savai Pumsam Parodharmo Yado Bhaktir Adoksaje, Aituki Apratiyata Yatma Supradati. The supreme occupation, dharma for all humanity, is that by which man can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. Since we are all eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, we are just like the leaves of a tree or plant, and the Supreme Lord is the root. The tree or plant will never get nourished by watering the leaves. It only gets nourished when we water the roots, and that's why we can only attain satisfaction, we can only attain perfection by acting for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, who is the root. Otherwise, whenever we are engaged in material sense gratification, when we try to satisfy our senses, we still end up with nothing but frustration, because it is as foolish as trying to water the leaves. So that is why we have to also look at devotional service as the only means to attain perfection, especially uh, in our current human form of life. So, with all this proper understanding, it enabled Arjuna to understand that he is meant to be a servant of the Supreme Lord, and he said, Karishye Vachanam Tava. He did not say that, okay, I'll annihilate all the enemies, I'll win the kingdom. He simply said, I'll act according to your instructions as a, a true servant. So ultimately, if we truly understand the teachings of the Gita, we will understand the our original constitutional position as eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. Okay, why do we have to particularly focus on the Bhagavad Gita? Many times, whenever we go for book distribution, especially to distribute the Gita, ironically, some people who don't even know how many chapters and verses are there in the Gita, they talk about wanting to master all the four Vedas. They talk about wanting to master all the 18 Puranas. But as Kali Jivas, this is the irony of the Kali Jivas. We have so limited time. We we don't even know what is there in the Gita, which is the essence of all the Upanishads, and still we are thinking that we can actually master all the Vedas and Puranas. The Supreme Lord himself has been so merciful to deliver the essence of all the Upanishads, and the um, the exalted feature of the Bhagavad Gita compared to all the other Shastras is that it was spoken directly by the Supreme Lord. So apart from being the most suitable scripture for the Kali Jivas who have very limited time, it is also very special because it was spoken by the Supreme Lord himself. Mukha Padmat Vinishrita. So there are so many editions of the Bhagavad Gita in the market. So why should we particularly focus on Bhagavad Gita as it is written by Srila Prabhupada? Because in all the other editions, normally we find the Sanskrit verse and just the translation without much explanation. And the translation itself is often distorted. But in this edition, Srila Prabhupada gives word by word meaning. Then the translation is actually derived from the word by word meaning. And there are also these extensive Bhaktivedanta purports, which are not Srila Prabhupada's own biased commentary, but they are always full of references to many other authentic Shastras. Simply by studying Srila Prabhupada's purports, we can find so many verses from many other scriptures, like the Puranas and also the Upanishads. So the purports uh, written by Srila Prabhupada are not like the biased commentaries written by some of the so-called scholars, but they all come from the bona fide parampara. So that's why Bhagavad Gita, as it is especially more important. It is especially more important to study the Bhagavad Gita as it is compared to all the other editions in the market. So, apart from merely studying the Gita, Lord Krishna also says about the importance of delivering the transcendental teachings of the Gita to other devotees. For one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed, and he will come back to me. So, in addition to our usual sadhana like japa and deity worship, preaching about the Bhagavad Gita is also a form of devotional service. So that is why book distribution is also very important, because whenever we go for book distribution, it's not simply like getting to sell the book, but we talk about what is there in the Gita and how is it relevant to us. We enlighten the other person and try to invoke the Brahma Jignasa spark in the other person. There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. 18.70. And I declare that he who studies this sacred conversation of ours worships me by his intelligence. So we can only preach about the glories of the Gita. We can only preach about the transcendental teachings of the Gita if we ourselves have studied. And that is the importance of studying the Gita. And by studying the Gita, we are also worshipping the Supreme Lord by intelligence. And one who listens with faith and without envy becomes free from sinful reactions and attains to the auspicious planets where the pious dwell. So even for those who are not major scholars of the Gita, even by attending classes, slowly, even that gives them some piety to further progress in their spiritual life. So in this session, we have seen why the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, and also in the last few slides, we also saw why it is especially important for us to study the Gita and also preach about it. So by focusing on the teachings of the Gita, it is actually good enough for us to focus on the Gita. But for those who have actually done some advanced study, then they can progress gradually to Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. Otherwise, for us, the fallen Kali Jivas who do not have much time, it is enough if we simply focus on studying the Bhagavad Gita and act according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord. Whatever knowledge that we gain, it should all culminate into devotional service. Otherwise, it's useless. We are only going to be trapped in this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. But if we simply follow the instructions of the Lord, we can go to Goloka, back to Gauri. So that's all for today. Any questions or comments?
No.
Okay, thank you.